Greetings, and welcome to this week's Midweek Refuel, where we dust off the ancient Christian tomes and plunder Egypt for its gold. Please take a moment to hit the subscribe and or like button. It helps us to reach more people in the name of Jesus Christ. This week, Augustine finds himself on the outside looking in on a person who is becoming addicted. I'm sure Augustine is familiar with addiction in his own life, and now in his confession, he is watching a student or a previous student of his that he had high hopes for become addicted. Alypius, a promising young student, is drawn away by friends, that's key, to the circus. Augustine writes of Alypius's predicament thusly, quote, "But the moral whirlpool of Carthage, with its seething passion for the frivolities of the theater, had sucked him down and made him a mad follower of the games," unquote. Now, this might be a little hard for us to hear because every single last one of us is nearly hopelessly addicted to entertainment. That's our culture. But try to put yourself back in time. Try to put yourself back to an agrarian society with no electricity, no Spotify, no smartphones, no TVs, just brothels and circuses to entertain you. Circuses and the gladiatorial games are the theaters and the Monday night football in that society. In fact, you can plug nearly any addictive waste of time into this equation, and you end up with the same math. I like picking on sports addicts, but when I'm done picking on sports addicts and wondering how they waste their time on that stuff, I go waste my time on PlayStation. So each of us, whether it's Spotify or theaters, has some form of entertainment in our lives that we give a really good amount of time to. And according to the ancients, we give nearly every form of entertainment a sick amount of time. I've always found it very interesting how addiction aware the classic thinkers and the classic writers were. The generations before the baby boomers would have put an end to Facebook before it ever took off, before it ever left the colleges. And they would have created a shame culture that helped to keep people free of addictive behavior, whatever that behavior was, good or bad. Now, we have theaters and other venues submitting to cell phone addiction just to keep people coming to the theater and addicted to the movies as well. Addiction upon addiction. Just imagine Augustine saying this about you, quote, "When I discovered that he was desperately in love with the circus, I was deeply disturbed, afraid that all the hope I had placed in him would prove wasted, if it were not indeed wasted already," unquote. Let's rephrase that. Just one or two words change and you'll feel it. Quote, "When I discovered that Johnny was desperately in love with Call of Duty, I was deeply disturbed, afraid that all the hope I had placed in him would prove wasted, if it were not indeed wasted already," unquote. Or football, or basketball, or hockey, or Minesweeper, or solitaire. Any of these could be fit in there. This is a very interesting statement because it sounds like not only, it doesn't just sound like spiritual advice and spiritual concern, but it also betrays a deep concern for the station in life to which a wise person would like to rise and reside. Denominational development is a very interesting study, the splitting of denominations, how new denominations come into being. What you find out is that many times a denominational split, or the creation of a brand new denomination coming out of a previous grouping, happens quite frequently when the church has raised the wisdom of an area, and they've raised that wisdom quotient so highly that the poor and uneducated generation that the church first reached out to has evolved in wisdom into the haves instead of remaining the have-nots. Now, I'm not a prosperity preacher. But wisdom, more often than not, will help you achieve prosperity. I don't say God promises prosperity to everyone. Some he gives a cross. But the church goes across the tracks, and the church has historically gone across the tracks. And across the tracks, after the church has been there, slowly becomes the promised land. And then people from the promised land decide that they're not doing their mission anymore. So they need to go across the new tracks and minister the gospel to a new set of people. Augustine is not only a Christian, but Augustine exists within a certain sphere of society, the sphere of thinkers and power brokers. And these people did not get addicted to ping pong. They got addicted to books, and scrolls, and classes, and learning, and thinking, and planning, and teaching, and exercising the virtues, and using their time for both personal gain and improvement through the philosophies and through social, and then social improvement through ethics, government, and morals. When they saw a cohort head out to the hockey game, they all would prepare themselves for the loss of a thinker. Alypius's journey is telling. He breaks free from his love of the circus when Augustine taught a lesson that intentionally pointed out the frivolity and wastefulness of that entertainment. But later on, Alypius allows himself to be dragged by his friends to the gladiatorial games. He says to himself, quote, "I will not look, I will not enjoy, I will not allow it into the windows of my mind, and I will prove to my friends that they cannot addict me," unquote. Well, his ears end up betraying him. He was good to his word, but he left one mind gate open. And when the crowd roared at a fallen gladiator, his eyes flew open with every intent of disdaining and cursing what he was about to see. But when his eyes fell on the blood, he was filled with bloodlust, and the games had him. It was now Alypius that took friends to the games in order to lead them to addiction. Now, I realize this is all hard to hear. How do I know that? I know it because it's hard for me to hear. When I read things like this, I understand the depths of my addiction. Even if culture wouldn't consider me an addict of entertainment, the amount of entertainment that I imbibe and that you imbibe is radically different than the amount that was even available in Augustine's time. I realize that this is hard to hear. It's hard for me to hear. Augustine is pretty strict. He's pretty strict by today's standards. So let's take it easy on ourselves and start with giving up some addictions that we have. Let's start somewhere. We don't have to live the life of an ascetic, but let's begin saying no to ourselves. The Bible says you, as a disciple, you need to say no to yourself on a daily basis. You need to exercise that power. You don't lift 400 pounds over your head overnight. You work at it. You build the muscles. If your willpower is low, and you know your willpower is low and weak, the answer to your problem is to begin exercising it just as you would any muscle. Say no to something simple. Say no to something simple. Say no to a simple pleasure. You like grabbing a coffee every day, a $5 coffee. You like a nice chocolate bar every day. Something that you can say no to every day. And you think, well, that's not a sin. It's not. But it helps you build willpower. What do you think fasting is about? Yes, it's about getting the body into the nutritional state where the brain is eating pure brain food, and that allows you to think at deeper spiritual levels. And so I understand the physical aspects of fasting, but the practice of just a simple daily fast is to learn how to say no. Because if you can say no to food, you can say no to near about any other addiction. So try to fast for just a day. Find something to say no to and learn a lot about yourself and your culture in the saying of no. Proverbs 9:7-9 says this, quote, "Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning." Unquote. Augustine writes of the beginning of addiction and madness this way, quote, when it saw the blood, it drank in the savagery, nor did it turn away, but fixed its gaze and glutted itself on the fury, unknowingly taking pleasure in the wickedness of the fight, and becoming drunk on its bloody pleasure." Unquote. These old books always make me question my entire system of thinking and accepting of my social norms. Studying this material helps us to divorce our minds from the current zeitgeist of the age and get a much more mature and robust and third-person worldview and a much deeper self-understanding and self-knowledge. Augustine continues, quote, "What more is there to say? He watched, he cheered, he burnt. He took his madness away with him to stir him up to come again, not just with the friends who had dragged him there previously, but more enthusiastically than they, even dragging others along with him." Unquote. So let's turn to Book 6, chapters 7-8. And if you need a copy to follow along in, you can find one real easy. Just do a search for Augustine's Confessions and do open source copy. We are going to be starting in 6.7.11. "My complaint was shared by all of us who were living together on friendly terms, and I discussed these matters most of all and with the greatest familiarity with Alypius and Nebridius. Alypius was born in the same town as me. His parents were prominent citizens of the town. He was younger than I and had been a student of mine when I began to teach in our hometown and later at Carthage. He loved me because I seemed to him a good and learned man. I loved him for his great disposition towards virtue, which was fully apparent even when he was no great age. But the moral whirlpool of Carthage, with its seething passion for the frivolities of the theater, had sucked him down and made him a mad follower of the games. But while he was being spun round most pitiably in that whirlpool, I, as professor of rhetoric, had rented for my classes a lecture theater that was open to the public. Alypius was not yet attending my lectures as the result of a disagreement that had arisen between me and his father. When I discovered that he was desperately in love with the circus, I was deeply disturbed, afraid that all the hope I had placed in him would prove wasted, if it were not indeed wasted already. But I had no opportunity to warn him or to use any compulsion to call him back, either in accordance with my good wishes for him as a friend or my rights as his teacher. I thought that he thought the same about me as his father did, whereas in fact he was not like that. For this reason, he set aside his father's wishes and began to come into my lecture hall to pay his courtesy greeting, to listen for a while, and then go away. But it very nearly slipped my mind to have a word with him to keep his excellent character from perishing through his blind and precipitate enthusiasm for the vanity of the games. You, however, O Lord, who preside over the direction of all the things you have created, did not forget that he would be a priest of your sacrament among your children. And you worked through me, but without my knowledge, so that his amendment would be ascribed to yourself. For one day, when I was sitting in my usual place and my pupils were present, he entered, greeted me, sat down, and put his mind to the matter in hand. It happened that this was an expository reading. As I gave my exposition of the page, it occurred to me that I could illustrate it with a happy comparison to the circus games. And that way, the point I was trying to impress would be made more clearly and amusingly, while at the same time I could take a biting laugh at those who had been captivated by its madness. You know, O Lord, that I was not concerned at the time to heal Alypius of the sickness that had seized him. He, however, took it to himself, and believed I had spoken only on his account. And what another person might take as grounds for being angry with me, he, being the upright young man that he was, took as grounds for anger with himself, and for loving me all the more ardently. For you have once given the word that is woven into the web of your scriptures, rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. I had not rebuked Alypius. But you use all things, knowing, or unknowing, according to the order which you know, and righteous is that order. From my heart and my tongue you made burning coals to sear the mind that had promised so well and was wasting away, and to heal it. Let him refuse to praise you who does not consider your mercies, which praise you from the depths of my being. For Alypius, when he heard those words, rescued himself from the deep well in which he was willingly drowning and taking strange pleasure in being blinded. With mighty self-control, he gave his mind a good shaking. All the dirt of the circus fell away from him, and he went there no more. Then he convinced his reluctant father that he should study under me. His father gave in and agreed. But when he began to attend my lectures again, he became admired with me in the Manichae superstition, in love with their show of countenance, which he thought was true and genuine, when it was silly and seductive. It trapped precious souls who did not yet know how to attain the depths of virtue, and could readily be deceived by a superficial appearance of it. But even so, it is an adumbration and likeness of virtue that captures them. He did not, however, abandon the earthly path that his parents had bewitched him into following, and went to Rome before I did to study law. There he was carried away by a well-nigh incredible hunger for the gladiatorial games, and in a way that almost defied belief. Although he regarded such games with loathing and abomination, some of his friends and fellow students took him with good-natured force into the amphitheater, which happened to be on their way back from lunch, during the days when those cruel and diddly games were being celebrated. He protested vehemently, struggling and saying, "If you drag my body off to that place and set it down there, do you think you can make my mind or my eyes pay attention to the games? I shall be there and not be there, and thus prove myself stronger than you or they." On hearing these words, his friends took him off with them just the same, perhaps wanting to find out whether he could manage to do what he said. When they arrived and had sat down in what seats they could, the whole place was boiling with pleasures of the most savage kind. Alypius closed the door of his eyes and forbade his mind to pay any attention to all this wickedness. Would that he had stopped his ears! For at one moment in the fight a gladiator fell, and a great clamor arose from the whole populace and beat against him, and overcome by curiosity, and ready as it were to despise whatever the cause, even when he had seen it, and to prove stronger, he opened his eyes and was more severely wounded in his soul than the gladiator whom he longed to see had been in his body, and suffered a more pitiable fall than his whose fall had been the cause of all the clamor. The noise had entered his ears and unlocked his eyes to make a path by which his mind could be assailed and overthrown, being as yet more daring than strong, and all the weaker as it presumed to trust itself when it ought to trust you. When it saw the blood, it drank in the savagery, nor did it turn away, but fixed its gaze and glutted itself on the fury, unknowingly taking pleasure in the wickedness of the fight and becoming drunk on its bloody pleasure. He was no longer the man he had come, but one of the crowd to whom he had come, a true companion of those who had brought him. What more is there to say? He watched, he cheered, he burnt, he took his madness away with him to stir him up to come again. Not just with the friends who had dragged him there previously, but more enthusiastically than they, even dragging others along with him. Even from that state, however, you rescued him with your most strong and most merciful hand, and taught him to have confidence in you, not himself. But that was long afterwards. If you are a young person watching this today, then I want you to hear what Augustine has to say to you about relationships. Each person we are around has a personality. And when that personality goes off, It explodes like a hand grenade, and we who are around this explosion take bits and pieces of personality shrapnel into ourselves, and we incorporate them, and we change, we adjust, we assimilate, we react. We are not left the same. Do not put yourself into a situation where you are getting bad shrapnel. Do not put yourself into a situation where you are surrounded by people who you absolutely know will try to addict you and corrupt you. You might think you are more powerful than them. Learn something from dear Alypius. You might think you can shut your eyes and block your ears, but learn something from dear Alypius. But their shrapnel will enter in, even if it has to pierce the skin to do so. Will you ever be strong enough to handle it? Well, maybe. I hope so. But for God's sake, don't tempt fate with bad company. Love them, help them, minister to them, but do not trust your soul to allow them to test your spiritual resolve. And definitely don't trust your children to bad company in the hopes that your kids will teach them what love is. I've never seen that plan go well. Ever. Good resolve is hard. Bad resolve can be perfected by a dog. Our nation is video game addicted, drug addicted, game addicted, sports addicted, music addicted, video addicted, cell phone addicted. And I'm right there with you, willing to defend my addiction to the bitter end, just like the rest of you. But this makes me pause, and it should make you pause. It makes me wonder. It makes me long for something better for you and for myself. It makes me long to be free. And I know the King who sets people free. Christ is King. Hail to the King.